Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, this is going to be a recap and reflections video, mostly reflections video, on the last session of All for One Regime Diabolique that we got to play in. We started out Volume 3 of our series, and so Anthony was up to run us through the game. So Francois Letarte and I got to play our Musketeers again. And this is something that, we just don't get to do enough, so it's always a pleasure when we actually get to play. And in fact, sometimes we have to coordinate our schedules because we're all pretty busy and Anthony's on the other side of the world. So this particular time, we started the games at about midnight, our time. And we played 2 days in a row because we ended up on a cliffhanger. And we decided, well, let's play again. And it turned out that we were able to play, I think it was like our Friday and Saturday nights, or mornings, if you will. So we were a little tired. But the game was a lot of fun. We ran into some, I don't want to say trouble or problems because that's not the right way to put it. But we had a certain intention for the sessions, and at some point it went a little awry. And we've already talked to death about that amongst ourselves. In fact, I committed a cardinal sin of watching Anthony's recap and reflections video before filming my own. But I think at this point we've already talked to each other quite a bit about this session. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But I really enjoyed how Anthony framed everything. We got a chance to have an interesting night out in 2 different locations. He presented us with some interesting scenarios. It was a laugh riot. I watched part of that, or listened to part of that session today. And there's this scene in the Risen Lamb, one of the bars that we go to, which was just hysterical. The characters, at this point, we've really kind of grown into them. They've really become much more real. And so if the sessions were called A Night to Remember, then it became Nights to Remember. But if Philippe were actually going to name the session, he would have called it something like, how Briscoe screwed me over by following around his libido rather than thinking with his head. Which is not the first time Briscoe has done this sort of thing. But we really got to see some interesting personality quirks of these 2 individuals. As Briscoe, his lifestyle is starting to catch up with him. He's already gained this bad reputation flaw, which gives him a lot of style points every time that reputation gets him into trouble. So I even made a quip during the session that, man, this isn't fair. And, of course, I think it's completely fair. But it was funny. But also, just the decisions that Briscoe makes are not always the best ones, but they're ones that make sense for that character, which I really like. And so I enjoy, I just enjoy, playing with Francois no matter what, whether he's the game master or a player. But I just enjoy watching how that character has developed and the decisions he makes. And it was really interesting to see just how irate Philippe became with him. We got a chance to really experience these 3 new trainees that I believe that Anthony actually kind of made up, and then I actually threw into our laps as actual trainees when it was my turn to be a game master. A lot of fun. We had some neat fun scenes with Briscoe's 2 lackeys, which were just phenomenal. But then things got darker near the end. I don't want to give anything away, but we had a great. There was a moment where the game started to turn in terms of the tone, because the tone that Anthony had presented, he said, I really want to do something light and swashbuckly, because we've been going down a little kind of this dark turn, and we've been exposing more and more of all the nefarious plots that are going on in Paris, and I want to do something a little lighter. And so the first half of the game was very light. In fact, we have a guard duty at the Louvre. We run into some problems with some people that are obviously up to no good, and there's this great moment where Briscoe and Philippe, we split the party. We go our separate ways for a second. Briscoe does exactly what he should do based on his motivations. It did cause us some trouble logistically, tactically. And, I, on the other hand, act impulsively and end up in quite a pickle. But I'm able to use some my own wits, figure out, like, how do I, as I'm facing several attackers, because that can be quite deadly in ubiquity, how do I tactically use the environment to my advantage, as a Renoir fighter would. So I end up backing up against the clock tower, and then use my talents to my advantage, and also use my rank in the Renoir school. Finally, really growing into feeling comfortable at using talents to actually borrow a talent, or using my resources rather, borrow a talent at that particular point, which really changed the tide of battle from being quite deadly, where these guys probably would have sliced and diced me, to the point where I was able to negate a lot of their advantages. So, a lot of fun. And there's this great scene where Francois, who is hungover, Briscourt is quite hungover and just, beat up from the last night because he made a decision to stay out, where he's showing up late to the party, as it were. Quite fun, quite interesting. I noticed some different things, about myself and about my character upon reflection afterwards. I acted according to his flaws quite a bit in the first half of the game, where his flaws are curious and thrill seeker, and I certainly had him do things like that. There's another scene in the salon of dance where I act in a very stupid and impulsive manner, and kind of a little thrill-seeking too, because I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing something that I did anyway. Later on in the game, near the end, after this cliffhanger, the cliffhanger was brilliant. It just happened at that point. We were all pretty tired. So we called it a night, and we were able to pick it up the next day, which was wonderful. But I would have been fully satisfied to, let that hang for a week or two. And by the way, now that I'm just all over the place, this is one of the things that I like this game so much, and I like playing with these people so much, that like when there's an opportunity, when one of us says, "Hey, I think I can run this now," I jump at the chance, and it was neat to see everybody else kind of get their schedules together. So it didn't matter to me that we were playing at this inconvenient time. It's that good and it's that fun, and I enjoy it that much. But anyhow, I noticed that I was acting according to my flaws and relatively well. I was playing the character in character. Later on, we get to this point where situation seems very dire. The stakes seem very high. We are, without ruining too much, we are now facing creatures of the night. We are facing the supernatural. And Philippe is a very competent swordsman. He has been, if he's facing men, even though the situation may be dire, even though he may get wounded, Philippe is competent. He is very satisfied in his ability to handle himself. Facing the supernatural, we have managed to defeat supernatural enemies, but every time it has been it's been very dangerous. And we've had situations where, at least two situations where it was almost a TPK, because creatures in All for One Regime Diabolique and in Ubiquity, they can be very tough. And I have not read the bestiary in some time, so I didn't remember exactly what the powers of this particular creature were, but I knew it wasn't good. The situation wasn't good. And there's this one point, once again, where we are really on two sides of a carriage, the inside and the outside, and we are separated, and things are not going well. We are getting the snot beat out of us by these creatures of the night. And it was becoming apparent, I didn't know what the weaknesses were, which I loved, but it was becoming very apparent that we might get our butts handed to us. And, more importantly, there was a non-player character who I've discovered that my character really cares about. And they were in a position where they were helpless, and they were, from my character's perspective, and even my perspective as a player, there was a good chance that this character might die. And they might die because we failed to save them. We botched some rolls, or not botched, but we missed, and it became obvious at that point that things were looking pretty dire. The stakes looked pretty high. And we've had some talk after this amongst the members of this group, and also members of a larger group, about Pulp Heroics, about the schisms between some of the expectations in Pulp Heroics and some of the framing of scenes and what the stakes really are, as opposed to say games where or an intention where you're playing with a lot more verisimilitude or realism, or you're not simulating a pulpy genre. You're simulating what might actually really happen in a situation like this. And we probably had some moments where our wires got crossed a little bit. The session just started to take a bit of a dark turn, and I think it's also kind of the nature of Anthony, the nature of myself, and even the nature of Francois. That we kind of ended up in this situation where the stakes were a lot higher than we initially anticipated. Going into the session, and my character started to hesitate, and thinking, and it actually, the ending of this session, it was done in a social manner. And it left us at a great disadvantage, but I found it incredibly satisfying. At the moment, my character hated it, but as a player, like reflecting upon this really throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing, makes it very, very interesting. It's not what we intended to happen, but I'm enjoying what happened anyway. And what I mean by it's not what we intended to happen, it's not the tone we intended, not the actual circumstances or events, because we don't know. We play to find out. But just the tone went in a different direction, which we've kind of been leaning towards the dark side. And we'll try to kind of pull it back a little bit, I believe. Because once you kind of, when you're walking this tightrope between, pulpy and kind of like this dark verisimilitude kind of supernatural horror, once you kind of go off on one, you lean a little bit, maybe towards the horror side, which is what happened, then, every action, every decision, it tends to kind of lean it back there. It takes a bit of effort to pull it back towards the midline, towards like where we want to have this campaign be. And we talked about the idea we might have, it might benefited from some out-of-character talk at that point, like, hey, do we want to pull this back a little bit? That, water on the bridge, it's a learning experience. And we've had some time to reflect upon that. However, now that I'm rambling again, one of the things that happened to me was I noticed that I probably had a little bit of bleed in. And what I mean is, I like this particular NPC, I don't want them to die, but more importantly, in my own life, when I see the stakes as being particularly high, when I see the circumstances as being particularly dire, if I fail at something, that things may go horribly wrong, that I have a tendency to hesitate and wait and freeze up a little bit and not act decisively. And I believe at that particular point, that kind of bled into young Philippe Moreau, who is, according to the pulp genre, according to the whole personality I built up for this character, is somebody that's going to act impulsively and decisively and rush right in, and, being a thrill seeker, and he hesitated. Now, part of it, I believe that was very in character because he cares about this person, and he realized he needed to negotiate with this nefarious creature of the night. However, I believe another part was a player error on my part, where I imposed too much of my own personality, if you will, upon my character. And so that gave me some time for reflection. I'm not sure that's ever happened to you, but that's part of what happened to, what I thought about after the session. Overall, the session was great. I really enjoyed the development these characters have had. Just the idea that, like I said, that was kind of like a 50-50 moment there, where Philippe has faced all these creatures of the night, and he's become more, I don't want to say scared of them, but he respects them a lot more. And so he had one of those moments. But I loved the way things turned out. I loved the entire session from top to bottom. It was always a pleasure. So it wasn't quite as swashbuckly and lighthearted and as pulp heroics as we had hoped or intended in the beginning. But nevertheless, I enjoyed the session. I believe it was quite a learning experience on a lot of levels. So I'm looking forward to running a solo session for Anthony, because that is my job now. And then after that, Francois Letarte is going to run us in our next session. So the campaign continues. And once again, we have saved France. Or have we? Well, you be the judge. Go watch the game.